It's my pleasure to welcome a friend and a scholar, Stephanie Collins, who's our second keynote for this conference. Steph is a senior research fellow at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne. She's written a lot, some of that stuff on care. Most of that stuff, I think, most of the articles are on collective duties, collectivization duties, responsibility caps, and all that sort of stuff. You know it. And then there's a new book which was released like a month or two ago called Group Duties, Their Existence and Their Implications for Individuals. And I believe that this talk is partly related to that. And without me spending more of your time, this is called Can We, Should We, maybe, Abilities and Duties for Non-Agentive Groups. Please,
cool.
Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks. Thanks, okay. Great, so I'm going to get straight into it because I'm aware of the time. Okay, so here are the kinds of claims that I'm going to be concerned with in this talk. As a nation, we may have different views on immigration, but surely we can all agree that Britain has a moral duty to provide safe harbour to more people fleeing conflicts. This was a claim that was made in an editorial in the Observer newspaper in the UK earlier this year. Here's a second claim that I'm concerned with. Conservatives have a particular duty to defend liberal democratic civilization from Trump's authoritarianism. This is a claim that was made by, let's say, political commentator on the conservative magazine blog site Bright Blue last year. Here's a third claim. This will be the last one. The international community has a moral responsibility, a political duty, and a humanitarian obligation to stop the bloodbath and find peace for the people of Syria. That was Ban Ki-moon, at the time the UN General Secretary, talking in 2012. Okay, so there are two things that I think are important about each of these three statements and statements like them. So first of all, notice that no member of the group can do the thing, right? So no individual member of Britain or the UK can make it the case that Britain provides safe harbour to more people fleeing conflicts. Even the Prime Minister, wonderful human that he is, cannot do that on his own, right? In his capacity as an individual, he's going to have to work with others to do that. Similarly, no individual conservative can defend liberal democratic civilization from anything or anyone. No individual member of the international community can find peace for the people of Syria. Okay, so no one member of each of these groups can do the thing. It also sounds like, in each of these statements, the group is being treated as if it has the duty. So particularly the first one and the last one, we can see this in the language that's used. So Britain has a moral duty. The has obviously implies that Britain is being treated as a singular entity. The last one, the international community, has a moral responsibility. The second one, conservatives have, so that implies that conservatives are being treated as a plurality. But it's still true that given that the first point I made, that defending liberal democratic civilization isn't something that any one conservative can do, I think it's plausible to assume that conservatives are being treated here as a plurality. This duty is something that they have together in a joint or shared way, rather than each of them individually having that duty. Okay, so in the book that Ani mentioned, I'm not just going to summarise the book in this talk, by the way, I'll get to what I'm going to do in a sec, but in the book that Ani mentioned, Group Duties, I asked two questions about these kinds of statements. So first of all, is the group in question the kind of entity that can bear a moral duty? That's the first question. Secondly, what does our answer to that question imply about the duties, the duties of the group's members? Okay, and those are the two questions that I'm going to talk about for the first 15 minutes of this talk. So what I want to do today, I've just said the kinds of things I'm concerned with, the questions that I answer in the book. What I want to do today is quickly give you an overview like a 10-minute overview of the overall answer to these questions that I propose in the book, without giving you any of the arguments, partly because there's a book symposium tomorrow, so if you want to hear what's wrong with the arguments, you can just come to that, because the commentators will tell you why it's all wrong, so there's no point in me giving it to you today. So I'm going to give you an overview of what I say in the book, then I'm going to focus in on one particular claim that I make, and I'm going to give different arguments for that claim than the arguments that I give in the book. So I'm going to give you new stuff. I'm going to give you overview and then new stuff for part of the overview. That makes sense. Okay. So here's what Groups Duties does to try and answer these two questions about these kinds of claims that groups can have duties. What I do is I divide groups into three kinds, which conveniently enough are each reflected in the examples that I opened with. Okay. So first of all, we have collectives. So collectives are will be familiar to those of you who know the like Peter French, Carol Rovain, Christian Lixton, Philip Pettit stuff on group agency, although I have quite a different account from either of those three people, but it's like the same rough idea. So collectives are groups that are constituted by agents where those agents are united under a rationally operated group-level decision-making procedure that has the potential to attend to moral considerations. So the group that the observer was talking about, Britain, I think we should interpret it, by the way, as United Kingdom rather than Britain, but anyway, Britain, that's going to be a collective. Likewise, BP is going to be a collective, the International Social Ontology Society is going to be a collective, Oxfam is going to be a collective. Yeah, I can say more about this in the Q&A if people want, obviously. Okay, that's collectives. Second part of the group duties model is coalitions. Conservatives are a coalition. So coalitions are, again, constituted by agents. All the groups that I'm talking about are constituted by agents. Coalitions are constituted by agents who each hold a particular goal, that should be singular, a particular goal or goals, it could be plural, and are disposed to work with the other members of the coalition to realise the goal. So conservatives, for example, are a coalition. That's actually made clear in the article that I quoted from. So the guy that wrote the article talks about conservatives being the kind of people who have the goal of lowering business regulation, decreasing taxes, and sort of maximising political liberty, something like this. Okay, so conservatives are a coalition. Likewise, environmentalists, feminists, the alt-right, all of these are coalitions. They are united by some goal that they each share. Final kind of group is combinations. So these are constituted by any collection of agents that don't together constitute either a collective or a coalition. So in that way, this division is exhaustive and mutually exclusive. So, for example, the international community would be a combination. The UN, of course, is a collective, but the international community is different from the UN. I can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. And when it comes to combinations, we just have unrestricted composition. So like me and Shakespeare is a combination. That's fine. Okay, so these are the three kinds of groups that I think matter for the purposes of duty attribution. I'm not saying these are the three kinds of groups that matter for all purposes that we might have in social ontology, but for the purposes of answering those two questions about duties that I started with, these are the three kinds that I think matter, just for answering those two questions in particular. Okay, so here's the model that I defend in the book. This is the overview part of the talk. I'm going to talk through this diagram, and then I'm going to go on to give new arguments for a particular part of this diagram. Okay, so, and this will help you know whether you want to engage with the book and come to the symposium tomorrow. So consider this as like some information for the conference. Okay, so here's the idea, or here's what I argue. When you're tempted to attribute a moral duty to a group of any kind, or when you hear a moral duty being attributed to a group of any kind, you should work your way through this flowchart. So first of all, at the top, you ask, is the group to which a duty is being attributed, or that you're attempted to attribute a duty to, a collective? If it is a collective, where's the pointer on this? There. Nope. Right, okay, I don't know how to do the pointer. If it is a collective, then the group can bear duties in its own right. It's not going to be a surprise to you, to those of you who have read other things on this topic, but my arguments are different from other people's. But if it is a collective, the group can bear duties in its own right. And furthermore, the implications for members are pretty hefty. So when a group bears a duty, each of its members bears a membership duty. A membership duty is a duty to use your role within the collective with a view to the collective doing its duty, roughly. Okay, if the group's not a collective, so if it's a combination or a coalition, then I argue it can't bear duties in its own right. This is something that no one's really argued for that much before. Holly Lawford-Smith argued for that claim in one article in 2015, but other than that, it's not really a claim that's been argued for much, and that's the claim that I'm actually going to focus on in the remainder of the talk. So, instead of asserting group duties in cases where the group is not a collective, I argue we should instead assert that each of its members bears what I call a coordination duty. Coordination duties are duties held by singular agents, where the content of that duty is to do what you can to realise the outcome that we wanted to assert a group duty over. So, for example, admitting refugees, stopping Trump's authoritarianism, bringing peace to Syria. Each individual member has a duty to do what they can towards that outcome in a way that's responsive to the other members of the group. Okay. I can say more about responsiveness in the Q&A. Great. Now, coordination duties differ depending on whether the group is a coalition or a combination. So if the group is a coalition, then the coordination duty requires the members to do what I call coalition reasoning, which is like a variant on we reasoning, for those who know that concept, probably most of you. So coalition reasoning is where you do what you can towards some outcome on the assumption that the others are going to pursue the goal that unites the coalition. I think that's kind of the core of we reasoning, is that you assume that other people are going to do their bit towards the outcome. Kirk has also argued for that. I'm not the only one who thinks that that's the core of reasoning. Okay, so that's if your group is a coalition, then coordination duties, i.e. acting responsibly towards the great outcome, requires that you assume the other members of your coalition are going to do their bit towards the goal your coalition shares. Last but not least, well, maybe least, but last, if your group is a combination, then coordination duties do not require coalition reasoning. Instead, they require I reasoning, which will be familiar for those of you who know this literature. It's just doing the best that you can towards some outcome without any particular assumption about what the others in your group are going to do. You might have evidence that derives from facts other than the kind of group that you constitute together with those people. Those facts will bear upon what you do when you're engaged in I-reasoning, but the kind of group that you are isn't going to give you any facts about what you should assume. Okay. So that, really quickly, is what I take like 80,000 words to argue for. So obviously there's a lot to be said about all of that. Again, that will get said in the symposium tomorrow. And if you really want to find out more, you can buy the book and get 30% off if you use that code. Gets it down to the low price of £35, which is like about €2 or something these days. So that's good. Okay. So yeah, you can... yeah, I guess on 31st of October. Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, whoops. Okay, great. So that bit highlighted in red there, the group can't bear duties in its own right if it's not a collective. That's the bit that I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk. I'll be honest, the reason I'm giving this bit as part of the talk, partly because this claim is very controversial, but also because the bit of the book where I argue for this ended up being too long. So I cut a bunch of it out and I'm now trying to work it into a new paper. So that's the bit that you're going to hear here. So this is stuff that's not in the book itself. Okay, great. So now moving on to the, non-summary part of the talk. Okay, so groups that are not collectives, that is combinations and coalitions, are, I'm going to assume, not agents. Just grant me that. Again, like I can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. But I'm going to assume that they're non-agents, or as I call it and as I'm calling it here, they are non-agentive groups as opposed to collectives that are agentive groups. Okay. And there's a puzzle, I think, that comes with our treatment of non-agentive groups. And the puzzle kind of comes in the form of a dilemma, a kind of ambivalence. So it seems like we're pulled in two different directions when it comes to our treatment of these groups. So on the one hand, non-agentive groups are constituted by agents. As I said when I was introducing the tripartite division between kinds of groups, all the groups I'm talking about are constituted by agents. And because they're constituted by agents, it's kind of tempting, I think, to give them all the agentive baggage or all the agentive concepts that we have. So abilities, intentions, actions, beliefs, desires, etc. Mental states at large. And it seems like a short step from that agentive baggage to normative baggage. Normative baggage being things like duties, responsibility, reasons. Okay. So that's one side of the ambivalence. Because they're constituted by agents, we want to treat them in this agenty and also normative-y or morally way. But kind of as I've stipulated here and can say more about in the Q&A, they are not themselves agents. And because the group itself is not an agent, it seems tempting to unpack that baggage and distribute it piecemeal. Right, so if you think about global warming, you ask who's responsible for global warming? Who has the beliefs that the implicit beliefs based on their actions that it's permissible to treat the planet in this way? Who seems to prefer to treat the planet in a way that's going to destroy it? Who has the ability to stop destroying the planet? Who has a duty to do so? Who's responsible if it doesn't happen? Who's going to be blameworthy? You ask this question, and it's tempting to say humanity, or all of us together, or the world, or the international community, or something like this. But it's also tempting to say that individual consumers are to blame for driving and flying and eating meat, and particular states are to blame for their contributions to like the failed Copenhagen Climate Summit in 2009, and these kinds of things. So the latter would be the distributive strategy, where instead of attributing responsibility and ability and so on for climate change to any one of the individuals that make up humanity, you instead take each of the agents, individual or collective, that make up humanity, and you give them each ability and responsibility and duty over their particular like share or slice or part. So driving, flying, contributions to negotiations if it's a state, drilling oil if it's BP, and so on. Okay. So if you take this like unpacking and distributing the baggage strategy, you're going to end up with different abilities and duties and responsibilities than if you go non-distributive. If you go non-distributive, you're going to end up with responsibility for climate change. If you go distributive, you're going to end up with responsibility for driving, flying, drilling oil, etc. Okay. I'm getting confused faces, but you can ask me about that in the Q&A. All right. So my general, I guess, approach to this ambivalence is to take a concept-by-concept strategy. So instead of asking, can non-agentive groups have abilities, intentions, actions, beliefs, desires, duties, responsibility, reasons, you instead take each of those concepts and ask for each of those concepts what the point and purpose of that concept is, and whether applying that concept to non-agentive groups captures or is true to, or something like that, the point and purpose of that concept. So I think this will, tell us something about the concepts themselves, as well as telling us something about non-agentive groups. And I think it will get us interesting results. So certain concepts might come apart where we thought that they wouldn't. Okay. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus on ability and duty in particular. And those are two concepts that I do focus on in one particular chapter of the book, but I'm going to give a different take on it here than I give in the book. Okay. So why those two? Why am I focusing on those two concepts, and whether those two concepts are applicable to non-agentive groups? So 3 reasons. One is that ability is agentive and duty is normative. So I think it's good to take one concept from each category. I think doing so might teach us something about these two categories of concept in general. That's tentative, but that's at least one motivation. They're also politically important concepts. When we think about, for example, climate change, I mean, personally, I'm not really that bothered about who prefers that climate change continues, or who has like some tiny reason that's just pro tanto and outweighable to stop climate change. I rather care about who can stop climate change and who has a duty to, or a strong obligation. I'm taking duties, by the way, to be moral reasons that are presumptively decisive in decision making. So they have this presumption to override other kinds of reasons. So they seem politically important. And also another reason why I'm focusing on ability and duty is that in the literature on collective obligation and responsibility, these two concepts are often taken to be mutually implicative. So a lot of authors assume that if ability applies to a particular kind of group, then that group must be the kind of thing that can have duties. And if a group is the kind of thing that can have duties, then it must be the kind of thing that has abilities. I do think the second one of those works. I don't think the first one does, and I think a lot of people make that first move. They say, this group is able to do a thing, therefore it must have a duty to do the thing. And I want to pull that apart, which is why I focus on these two concepts. Okay, great. So for the rest of the time, I'm going to speed up, first of all, and I'm going to talk about, I'm going to spend some time talking about abilities of non-agentive groups. I'm going to argue that groups that aren't agents have abilities. I think that the point and purpose of our concept of ability is such that we should apply that concept to non-agentive groups. But I'm going to argue that they can't have duties. So that's the pulling apart of these two concepts in their application to non-agentive groups. Okay, so abilities. Widespread assumption in the literature on abilities in general is that each ability belongs to exactly one agent. So when metaphysicians talk about the abilities of individuals, they're always talking about the abilities of a particular agent. My ability to play piano, or take some candy out of a bowl, or whatever. These are the kinds of examples that they like. But it seems that, and just intuitively, I'm just doing an intuition pump here, that there are some abilities that are held by groups or by at least pluralities of individuals. And here I'm neutral on whether we want to take the group as a singular entity or the collection of individuals as a plurality. So if you think about playing a duet, that's something that me and Arto can maybe do together. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. Playing a duet seems like something that a pair can do, that neither individual can do alone. Playing a game of rugby, that's interesting because it's something that two agentive groups can do. So each team is a group agent, but together they're not a group agent. But it seems like only when you have two such agents can you get a game of rugby going. Storming the Bastille. It's an example that Larry May likes to talk about. That's a case with a coalition, right? They've together got some goal, storming the Bastille, and it's only together that they're able to do it. Standardising milk prices via the invisible hand. This is something that the members of a society or the participants in an economy are able to do. But that's a case where, at least if you follow like Adam Smith and Hayek, they do it precisely not by aiming at it. So they exercise this ability of standardising milk prices by each pursuing their self-interest in the market, not by aiming to standardise milk prices. That's not what they're trying to do. But nonetheless, they're able to standardise milk prices. And of course, making the planet uninhabitable, to go back to the climate change example. Okay, so all of these just intuitively seem like things that non-agentive groups are able to do, that we would say they're able to do, I think. I'd be interested to hear if you disagree with that intuition in the Q&A. Of course, intuitions are not arguments, so here are 3 reasons why I think we should respect those intuitions. These reasons each come in degrees, so each of these reasons can apply to a greater or lesser extent of any particular ability of a non-agentive group. And the reasons, I take it, are additive. So it's not the case that all of these 3 reasons apply to every case, but the more of these reasons apply to a particular case, the stronger the argument for asserting that that ability applies in that case. So it's going to be, our calculations here are going to be a bit rough, right? To what extent does each reason apply to this particular case, like standardizing milk prices? And do all three or only two of these reasons apply to standardizing milk prices? So you're going to get a stronger or weaker case for each non-agentive ability that you might want to posit. But nonetheless, this is going to get us some non-agentive group abilities in our social ontology. Okay, so here are the three reasons. They're pretty familiar. I've chucked them all up so you can see them all. And they're on your handout too. Okay. So first of all, the outcome is emergent. Again, like this will not be news to those of you who have thought about this stuff before. So the outcome is emergent. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that, different people mean different things. What I mean is that in order to get the outcome, the contributions of the agents, that is the members of the non-agentive group, have to be combined by relations that are more than just conjunction. So in particular, the contributions have to be spatio-temporally related in some way. They have to be networked, is another way of putting it. In some cases, they also have to be mutually causative. They have to cause one another. Okay, so take playing a duet. If I play my bit and then Arto plays his bit 2 hours later, we haven't played the duet, right? We've totally failed. We play the duet only if we play our bits at the same time, and maybe even within earshot of each other. Okay. You can see, hopefully, how it works for the rest of those examples. Even making the planet uninhabitable, you know, if we each perform particular actions 1,000 years apart, that probably wouldn't be enough for making the planet uninhabitable. Instead, it's got to be that BP drills the oil and then takes it to the petrol station, and then I buy the petrol, and it's all got to be nicely linked up in order for it to kind of result in me burning fossil fuels. Okay, so the outcome is emergent in that specific sense of emergent. Right. Second of all, the outcome is multiply realizable. So those of you who were in Adrian's talk in the last session, this will be very recently familiar. I know not all of you were, but some of you were. Playing a duet. I could play part A and Arto could play part B, or we could swap parts, assuming we're each familiar enough with the two parts. So the individuals needn't play the particular parts that they play in the realization of the outcome. Likewise, it's even more clear if you have a group where the individuals are replaceable, so playing a game of rugby. In general, you're going to have some people on the bench. If someone gets injured, you can bring in one of your guys off the bench, and that way the playing of the game of rugby can end up being multiply realizable. But you've still got one game of rugby. Like, still across, whether or not you've bring in the guy from the bench or not, you've still got a game of rugby being played. The same outcome results. And this connects to multiple realizability, positing the group's ability seems to give us a kind of causal explanatory power that we don't have if we don't posit it. And that's because, and this is again related to Adrian's talk, so that's because the group's ability makes a difference, or even makes the difference, whereas the individual's abilities don't. That's because the realization of the group's ability, so to now take storming the Bastille, if I'm not there to storm the Bastille, then that doesn't make a difference, probably, to whether or not the Bastille gets stormed. Likewise, if Arto's not there, doesn't make a difference. It's only, what makes a difference is whether there's like some group of people that's kind of big enough to storm the Bastille, to do it all at the same time on the same day. That's what makes the difference to whether the outcome results, not whether you've got any particular individuals doing any particular things. Okay, so that was very quick, and probably a lot of you have thoughts about that because that's all a bit controversial, but I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. Okay, great. Now, assuming you grant me those reasons, which I hope you do, you might nonetheless think, okay, fine, there's some kind of social level causation in our picture now, but that causation doesn't amount to an ability. Why not? Because ability is an agentive modal. It's a modal that applies to agents. So you might think, all right, now when we say the mob is able to storm the Bastille, what we're saying is something that's kind of equivalent to Krakatoa has the ability to erupt, hydrangeas are able to grow around here, or steel is able to withstand temperatures of 1,000 degrees, right? So each of these there's kind of felicitous statements. I was going to say they're even true. I don't know if hydrangeas can grow around here, but some kind of trees can. So these are, at least they're truth apt. Some of them are true. But these aren't abilities. To call these things abilities is to miss the fact that the special work that ability does for us is that it captures things that we do via our agency, you might think. And I think a lot of people who work on abilities at the individual level would at least say that. It's meant to be an agentive concept. When we say these things about Krakatoa and hydrangeas and steel, we're rather saying that something can happen or something might happen, or it's likely that something will happen, or something will probably happen, or something will happen under certain conditions in the case of steel. But we have these words for that, so why don't we just say the mob might storm the Bastille, that the people on the paddock are likely to play a game of rugby, rather than saying that it's an ability. Okay, so non-agents' abilities seem to be just like these kinds of claims, and so positing the ability seems to neglect the fact that ability is an agentive modal. This is where the point and purpose of the concept comes in. So, I think it's true that ability is an agentive modal, and I think we should keep it playing that role for us. But I suggest, here's my suggestion to you, that what we want the concept of ability to do for us is to point out or capture the difference between things that are possible via agency, outcomes that are possible via agency, and outcomes that are possible via non-agency. So the nice thing that the concept of ability can do for us is capture whether choices or decisions or wills could come to be behind some outcome, like playing rugby or storming the Bastille or environmental destruction. And I should say as well, the sense in which choices and decisions and wills might come to be behind that outcome is perhaps by causing like habits or skills that are held by agents. I owe Judith Martins a hat tip for discussion of that point. Okay, so I think that's what we want ability to do for us, is capture that. I need to speed up, so really quickly. Take a classic example of the path through the forest. It matters to us, I think, in our explanations of the world, whether that path is just made by trees happening to grow in a certain way that happens to cause a path, or whether that path is instead created by a number of agents, each happening on different days and for different reasons to walk through the forest in that way such that it creates that path. That's the difference between something that's caused by an agency and something that's caused by a non-agency. If that's our reason for attributing abilities to some entity, individual or group, then this doesn't open the floodgates to any old group ability. So if you think about the lunch that we had today, right, there's this question, are the ISOS delegates able to eat all the lunch? The answer to that, let's say the answer to that is yes. We're hungry. Eating all the lunch today is an ability that we might attribute to us. No one of us has the ability to eat all the lunch today. No one of us has a stomach that big. But we have the ability, even though I think all of us together aren't a group agent. Well, I guess we are all members of ISOS, forget that. Supposing we're not a group agent. We have the ability to eat all the lunch today, but we don't have the ability to digest all of today's lunch once it's eaten, because digesting isn't something that you do via your agency. Digesting is a kind of a passive thing. I'm here making a bit of a dichotomy between things we do actively and things we do passively. I'm happy to be pressed on that in the Q&A if you want and say more about the habit skills stuff. Okay, great. So this isn't going to get us the result that anything that's caused by agents is the exercise of a group level ability. Shoot. Okay, I am really going to have to speed up at this point, so I will just give you my proposed analysis of non-agentive groups' abilities, and I will skip over the 6 virtues of that analysis that are on your handout that you can ask me about later. Okay. So here's my proposed analysis of non-agentive groups' abilities. A non-agentive group has the ability at time t to produce outcome x, just in case each member at t has the ability to, at some time, perform actions that are a contributory part of a pattern of behaviours that will robustly secure X. There's a lot to be said about this that I because I've been going too slowly. Unfortunately, we'll not completely be able to unpack, but just to talk quickly through some examples. To take the duet example, Arto and I have the ability right now to produce the outcome of playing a duet. Just in case, each of us right now, which we don't, well, we do, we have the ability actually, but not the opportunity, maybe. Each of us has the ability to, back up. We have the ability right now to play the duet, just in case, at some time, which could be later, because we don't have our instruments with us right now, we have the ability to, at some time, maybe later, perform actions, i.e. our individual parts, that are a contributory part of a pattern. The pattern is us doing that contemporaneously, of behaviours that will robustly, that is across enough possible worlds or circumstances, secure the playing of the duet. There is more I could say about this. I'm happy to say it in the Q&A, but for reasons of time, I will move on. Important upshot is non-agentive groups have abilities because of the purpose that I think that concept should and could and does maybe play in our social world. Okay, I'm going to skip over this. Great. I'm going to move on to duties, which is perhaps the more controversial part of this, actually. All right, so a lot of philosophers make this move, without the question mark. An entity has an ability, therefore it's the kind of thing that's liable to have duties, moral obligations, moral reasons that are presumptively decisive, have a presumption of being decisive in decision-making. This is bad. Here's why this is bad. Non-agentive groups can't make decisions. An entity can bear a duty only if the entity can make a decision, so non-agentive groups cannot bear any duty. This, very simply, is my argument for why non-agentive groups cannot bear duties. All right, so I'm going to talk through 1 and 2, and then I'm going to conclude. Okay, so first of all, 1, non-agentive groups cannot make decisions. Here's a way in which you might think non-agentive groups can make decisions. I'm going to suggest that it doesn't work, and then I'm just going to conclude that they can't make decisions. If you have other examples of ways in which you think non-agentive groups can make decisions, I am absolutely all ears. I don't know how to argue for this negative claim other than just considering examples as they come up and refuting them as they come up. Yeah. All right, so here's one way in which non-agentive groups might be taken to make decisions. You might have a situation where each member decides to do something that concerns something the group does. So, for example, each member might decide to aim at the halting of climate change, or might aim to aim at doing their bit, or decide even to do their bit towards halting climate change. Right, so that might be something that happens. And these decisions of the individuals might even be causally interlinked. They might even be mutually conditionalized in a way that David Velleman once talked about in a relatively famous paper that I'm happy to discuss later if you want me to. But it might be that I commit to doing my bit in halting climate change only if you commit to doing your bit in halting climate change, and you do the same thing, and then these together become common knowledge, and then we each do our bit. We each do our bit towards halting climate change. They might be mutually conditionalized in that way. And hey, I said earlier that if the contributory parts towards some outcome are related by a relation of more than mere conjunction, then we get a kind of emergent phenomenon. And so if we have this kind of causal interlinking or mutual conditionalization, then it looks like we've got a kind of relationality that's going to lead to emergence, and that's going to give us a reason to posit a group-level phenomenon, in this case a group-level decision, if the individual decisions are interlinked. Okay. Now, it's true that this is one reason for positing group decision, the fact that they're causally interlinked or conditionalized, but I don't think that's enough. There are other considerations that are going to suggest that this kind of mutual interlocking of decisions doesn't get us a group decision. So first of all, this alleged group decision isn't multiply realizable, right? It's realized by each individual deciding to do their part or aiming at the outcome. There's not that kind of chopping and changing in different patterns that we got in the abilities case. Also, the causal explanatory reason for positing group level abilities doesn't seem to be met in the case of these alleged decisions. So if everyone in the world, as is not going to happen, but as maybe happens in some alternative timeline, if everyone in the world decided to do one's bit towards halting climate change, we might be tempted to say humanity decided to halt climate change, and that's going to look like a non-agentive group making a decision. But saying that humanity decided isn't explanatory, because it's realised only via each individual member of humanity deciding to do their bit or to aim. So humanity decided doesn't hold over a range of possible worlds because there's only one realisation of that alleged humanity-level decision, and it doesn't really seem to go deeper into the mechanisms of how we decided in the actual world to explain the mechanisms by which we decided we're going to go individual level or collective agent level rather than humanity level. Okay, 5 minutes, great. Also, each decision is controlled by its individual maker. So although my intention might be conditionalised on Ardo's and Ardo's might be conditionalised on mine, it's nonetheless me that makes that conditional decision of I'll do my bit if Ardo does his. And it's Ardo that makes his decision of I'll do my bit if Steph does hers. So we each control our respective decisions. Okay. Quick note on Margaret Gilbert, just because I suspect it might come up in the Q&A at this point. You might think that humanity could jointly commit to halt climate change and that joint commitments are a conceptual primitive and that thereby the decisions of non-agentive groups, or at least the commitments of non-agentive groups, are conceptual primitives. I think in this context that's question-begging. Yeah, I can say more about that in the Q&A if people want. I think if we're talking about going for a walk where we have a really small group that maybe looks plausible, I think it's implausible in the case of a group that's the size of humanity. Okay. Right. Okay, so that's why non-agentive groups cannot make decisions. Happy to hear more counterexamples in the Q&A, and afterwards, by all means, please chuck them at me. Okay, moving on to the idea, the second premise in this argument, which is that an entity can bear a duty only if the entity can make a decision. All right. Why I think that's true? Okay, so first reason, again, a little intuition pump. It's intuitive that decision-making is necessary for taking the participatory or second personal stance towards some entity. So, as might be familiar to some of you, the second personal stance or the participatory stance is something that Strawson and later Stephen Darwall talked about. So, Darwall defines it as addressing orders, requests, claims, reproaches, complaints, demands, promises, contracts, givings of consent, commands, and so on. Where this presupposes, he says, authority and accountability relations. This stance and making these addresses towards entities, again, this is an intuition pump, intuitively requires that those entities that we're addressing can make decisions. Oh, and that's Strawson on the participatory stance, so holding the attitudes and reactions of offended parties and beneficiaries, engaging in such things as gratitude, resentment, forgiveness, love, hurt feelings. Okay. We tend to think that creatures like you and I have duties. We tend to think that creatures like toddlers and trees don't have duties. An intuitive good explanation for this is that we can make decisions and they can't. Again, that's just the intuitive argument. Here's a more substantive argument. And this again goes back to this question of what's the point and purpose of this concept? So what's the function of duties? What role does it play in our social world? What role should it play? This should guide the entities to which we attribute this concept, or to which we apply this concept. So I suggest that the function of duties, the point and purpose of the concept of duty, is to demand that things be done. Or what I hope is a different way of saying the same thing, to guide action. And it does this in 3 ways, and which correlate to 3 different perspectives. So the first is first personal deliberation. When I'm deciding what to do, duties are an input into my deliberation. That's the function that they play. They are instructions, they are imperatives that I take myself to be bound by when I'm deciding what to do. Second way in which they play this role of demanding that things be done or guiding action is in second personal claim making. If Arto makes a promise to me, I might come to him and say, Arto, you made this promise, you owe me. I'm making a claim against him. Third, some duties aren't owed to particular individuals, so promises are owed, Arto's going to owe it to me, but some duties arguably just are imperfect or not owed to anyone. Duties to nature might be like this. So with these kinds of duties, duty plays the role of kind of advice giving. If someone asks me, what should I do about future generations, where let's say you can't owe future generations anything because of the non-identity problem, I might say, here's my advice, make future generations as happy as you can, something. And these are the 3 roles that duties play: deliberation, claim making, advice giving. Whoa, how did that happen? There we go. All of these presuppose that the duty bearer is a decider, I think. Notice as well that this idea is modest. So this idea that an entity can bear a duty only if the entity can make a decision. My claim is not that you can bear a duty to do X only if you can make a decision to do X, right? So some duties are going to be things that we do out of habit, say interpersonal, like spousal duty, some kind of familial duties are probably like this. You just do them out of habit. You don't think about it. You don't make a decision every time. Some duties are going to, if you just do it on the basis of a decision, that's going to be kind of one thought too many. So your spouse is drowning in the lake, you think about it and weigh up, should I jump in and save them? And then you decide to jump in and save them. There's something fishy about that, something a bit one thought too many going on. So you might just do it without deciding, automatically, or at least without a conscious decision. So my claim is not that in order to be any particular duty, like a duty to save your spouse who's just drowned in the lake, that you have to be able to make a decision to do that thing. It's just that in order to hold a duty, you have to be able to make some decisions. You have to be the kind of creature in general that can make decisions. Okay, stop, he's saying. All right, so that was the argument for why abilities don't imply duties. Okay, I will now take 30 seconds to summarise. Thanks, Lonnie. Okay, so methodological upshots. Different concepts serve different purposes. Ability, duty, belief, blameworthiness, etc. Whether we apply that concept to a particular entity in our social ontology, and I'm particularly concerned with non-agentive groups here, depends upon the concept's purposes. So that's the general takeaway. Probably most of you agree with that anyway, but it's a nice thing to keep in mind. Substantive upshots of this talk. Duty serves the purpose of guiding decision-making. So only decision-makers can have duties. Non-agentive groups can't. So we should reinterpret such alleged duties as members' coordination duties. I haven't argued at all for this bit here, but agential groups, that is collectives, can have duties, which imply membership duties. Ability, on the other hand, serves the purpose of identifying an outcome that is possible via agency, very different purpose. That agency might inhere in many creatures in a plurality. So non-agential groups can have abilities. Political upshots, we can halt global warming, but the duties are much more complicated. We don't have an obligation to stop it. We each have an obligation to do our part. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it's on. Well, there's plenty of questions, so please keep your hands up for a little moment, but let's start from the middle, please. You're in the middle, yes. And wait for the mic, and please one question at a time. That's sort of...
Thank you. I'm Susanna Krzykalska, and I wanted to ask if you, for example, if a country or the nation has a duty for something, a lot of those examples that you gave at the beginning seem like really a very political claims that...
Right.
Yeah. And I really like that you said that, should reinterpret those duties as members' coordination duties. So each member has a duty. But when it comes to those entities, like institutional entities, like countries or international organizations that have these political duties, they have instruments to coordinate the members' duties.
Yep.
They have instruments as legislation, for example. So by the members' duties, you of course include that if somebody is in parliament, they have like the duty to act as a parliament. Or would you reduce those kind of duties to those other institutional groups that do have agentive powers that can guide behavior of the whole collective, like the whole, for example. So the legislation, like the parliament is an agent, it can make law that we should, I don't know, throw away paper and plastics, everything.
Okay.
And through this action, they actually, what they do is that they make it happen that all the British people do the change. So,
yeah. Great. So the question is, if the state might have a duty, and it might require only that certain members of the state, i.e. the legislators, perform actions, and it might not require that any ordinary citizens do anything. So it might not require that each member does something. Sorry, it took me a while to get there. Great. Good. I was giving the shorthand gloss on my account of membership duties. So the official account, which you're right to call me up on this because I was glossing, is that each member has a duty to use their role as appropriate, is the locution I use, as appropriate, with a view to the collective doing its duty. And for some members, that might require just that they check that there's nothing that they have to do. And that is going to be substantive. So in particular, if you're thinking about citizens in a democratic state, I think that this duty of checking that the parts of the group agent of which the duty requires some action are actually doing the thing that they should do is quite demanding, and a lot of us don't actually discharge that duty very well. So I think that duty of checking that the other bits of the collective are doing their role is going to require something of us. Also, for the case of Parliament, so Parliament passes legislation that we have to divide up our recycling in a certain way. That's then going to require that we each divide up our recycling in a certain way. And that's going to be using our role, namely our role of people using council bins, I guess is the way to think about it. That is a action that's part of the state, that we use our role to do something. So it's downstream, it is going to require actions of all members of the group. So as appropriate, checking, and then also there are going to be downstream requirements of even low-level members. Yeah, thanks.
Please, the next one.
Thanks very much for a really interesting talk. I was looking at the definition of a group having an ability and thinking that it ought to entail that many non-agentive groups have the ability to make decisions, which mean they can make decisions. Because it says a non-agentive group has the ability to time T to produce outcome X just in case each member of T has the ability to, at some time, perform actions that are contributing part to a pattern behaviors to robustly secure X.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a group of people who are not, don't know each other, might be in a circumstance in which they could get together and perform actions to make a decision as a group. So it looks like they would have the ability to make a decision. And you can imagine the circumstances in which this arises, something salient occurs, one looks to the other and says, hey, maybe we can do something to take care of this, and they get together and make a decision. So they have the ability at the time to make a decision in a non-agentive group.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. I'm probably going to need to think more about that. I think what I want to say off the cuff is that securing that outcome, the outcome of the group making a decision, is going to require implementing a decision or having them all commit to a decision-making procedure, which is going to render them a collective. But then you just want to say, okay, so a non-agentive group has the ability to become a collective, and then they have this diachronic ability to make a decision. Yeah, that's good. I might have to tweak the analysis. I should say, this is different from slightly different from the analysis I give in the book. So I've already tweaked it. So the book came out last month is already out of date. So I might have to tweak it again. Yeah, I'm going to have to think more about that. I think I'm going to want to tweak with the times in order to resolve that. And actually, the version I had in the book was didn't have the at sometime, it had at t. So maybe this is helpful. Maybe I should revert back to the what I had in the book and change that at sometime back to at t, and then that would get rid of this. But I'll think more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering about the distinction between possibility by agency and by non-agency, and how it applies to some cases, particularly downstream consequences of these things that are possible by agency. So let's suppose that we, by coming into this room in a coordinated way, make the floor collapse, right, that alter the floor.
Okay.
That seems like it would be unintended. It might still be robustly secure, I suppose. So, are those cases meant to be excluded? I guess maybe so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, good. So I'm trying to bracket some questions. I'm moving some bumps around under the carpet. So I want to be neutral on what counts as members performing actions. So I don't know that, so in case people didn't hear it, so us walking into the room and the floor collapsing, I don't think we're performing actions, we're performing the action of walking into the room. Are those actions going to count as a contributory part? Yeah, good. I guess they would, yeah, count as a contributory part of pattern of behaviours. Yeah, so maybe I do. Maybe I am happy to say. And I think, actually, no, I think I'm going to bite the bullet on this one. We have the ability to break the floor in, because I definitely want to capture the environmental destruction case. That's really, politically, I really want to capture that. And I think that's going to mean that I end up saying, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we do via our agency, kind of unintentionally, that we have the ability to do. And that captures some noises that people make in the literature on individual ability. So people will talk about my ability to absent-mindedly play with my jewellery. Like Barbara Vedder talks about that example. She thinks that's an ability, and that seems like something that I don't kind of intend to do at the time of doing it. So I'm not in terrible company in saying this. So yeah, I think I'm happy to say we have the ability to break the floor in. Yeah.
Okay, Johan Wenmark. So this question will actually be pushing further on this same point, I guess.
Okay.
I think this robust security, it opens up for a lot of types of mechanisms to get into X. And some of those might run via sort of the real agency of some other person or entity. So far-fetched example here. But say there's an evil demon who has committed to making the sun go supernova if we manage to coordinate and prevent climate change.
If we coordinate around climate change, the sun goes supernova, okay?
Climate change, then the sun will go. We will robustly secure the sun going supernova.
Okay.
This evil demon has committed to doing that. So, on your definition, I mean, we would have the ability to make the sun go supernova.
Yeah, good. 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 Us and the evil demon together, so not just us, but us and the evil demon taken as one big group, have the ability to make the sun go supernova. Yeah, does that seem like the wrong result?
I mean,
I'm not.
it seems that it's the evil demon solely who has the ability to make the sun.
But we have the ability to. Sorry, interrupt. We have the ability to stop it. If we do nothing on climate change, he's not. Well, you didn't stipulate that. You said he would do it if we did. You didn't say that we wouldn't do it if we didn't. But assuming he wouldn't do it if we didn't, we've got the ability to stop him. So we're key players in the game. It's not fully down to him. So it seems, that it's dependent on the agency of all of us plus that whole big group. That seems right, doesn't it?
I mean, it's
okay. Look.
Okay, yeah. I am stretching the notion of ability. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, before I set an evil demon upon you, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah.
So,
So, for some decades now, I've been talking about joint rights, joint duties, and more recently about joint abilities. So what I want to see is how different your story is from my story. So let's take an example. Abilities, by the way, are obviously don't entail duties, since if you're not a morally sensitive agent, you may be able to do something, you've got the ability to do it, but if you don't actually have any sense of what a duty is, then you presume you don't have any duty. Anyway, so let's work through this example. A couple of ambulance drivers, there's a patient in the back of the ambulance, got to get to the hospital. Unfortunately, the ambulance breaks down. So the two of us could push the car to the hospital to save this person's life. I can't push the ambulance by myself. You can't do it. What have we got? Joint ability to push the ambulance to the hospital. If we both push, it'll get there.
Yep.
Okay, so what about joint duties? Well, I've got a duty to do my pushing, and you've got a duty to do your pushing. The duties are independent. It's a joint duty.
Yep.
What about the end? The end is to get the patient to the hospital. In fact, that's the driver. I've got that end. You've got that end. In fact, the ends are interdependent. Oh, hang on. I've got an obligation to discharge that end. You've got an obligation to discharge that end. We've got a joint obligation with respect to the end, getting the person to your hospital. Oh, and by the way, we've got a joint obligation with respect to the means. I've got to do my bit, you've got to do your bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that the whole problem can be handled in terms of joint abilities, joint rights, but we have to understand that there are two kinds of joint duties. There's joint duty with respect to the means.
Mm-hmm.
There's also joint duty with respect to the end.
Okay, great. So there are a number of things. So first of all, I'm not saying anything about rights. I just want to bracket rights entirely. Just put that off the table. So how I take my account will differ from yours is that my account's not teleological in the so that the agents don't have to be aiming at the thing. That's what the milk prices and the planetary destruction was meant to do. So that's just to answer the general question of the difference. On this ambulance example, I'm happy. You can frame non-agentive groups' abilities as joint abilities if you want. To be honest, I find it hard to see what rides on the choice between saying that the ability belongs to the group or the ability is joint. That's why I kind of did this whole thing in terms of, you can talk about the group as an entity or you can talk about pluralities. I don't really mind. Maybe we should talk more about that later. But I don't want to go that way with the duty for the reasons that I gave, that the group isn't the thing that can make decisions. So the decisions that are made, I make a decision to push my side of the ambulance, you make a decision to push your side. If you don't do your bit, I'm not culpable, assuming I'm pushing, and so I want to disaggregate the duties down to the individuals.
No, actually. Let's move on to the next.
Pursue the end. Yeah, you said discharge the end at one point. I don't like that language. We should talk more later. Yeah,
there's a whole list of questions still left. So, please.
Thanks. I have the same worry that
Okay.
I want to
the time thing.
push a little bit on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you'd agree that we have a group of people who can have the ability to form a collective agent.
Yes.
Right. And so, that means that everything, on the current definition, it seems that everything a collective can do, we can do.
Yeah.
It's a pre-collective.
Great. No, this is
So that's the general point.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the abilities needed to make decisions, it's not the ability to necessarily make a decision now about this important thing, because many decisions are decisions that will have to be made eventually. So we think about obligations. I have obligation to do certain things, but they don't call upon me to make a decision now necessarily. It might be that the decision can be postponed, I get more information.
Okay.
So it seems that the demands of morality are not instantaneous in a sort of sense. And so if you want to play with the temporal aspect, then I think it's really one thing to be careful with is to not, don't make it instantaneous. That would be bad.
Great, thank you.
So I guess it's just, maybe just.
No, that's really helpful, thanks, good. So in response to Kirk, I said, okay, replace at some time with at time t. And now you're saying, no, don't do that, because duties are these long run things sometimes, and they don't require these instantaneous actions, good. I think even long run, so one thing is t is going to be a longer or shorter segment of time. So t might be like a decade or something.
But also in the future, as a precise time of duties.
Yeah.
So I have a duty to return the book tomorrow.
Yeah, good. So if you only have the ability to return the book tomorrow, I'm not sure.
And now I have that.
At least the hook that Judy gets on your decision making isn't going to arrive until tomorrow. And so we say you have the duty now to return the book tomorrow, but assuming really now your agency is doing nothing vis-a-vis the book returning, if your decision making around the production of that outcome is only going to arise tomorrow, I mean, I agree. We would. I'm with you that ordinary language would say you have the duty today. I see the force of the point, but the duty only gets a hold on you tomorrow. Let's say that. That's fudgy, but I think that's true. I hesitate to say you only have the duty tomorrow, but the duty only gets a hold on you tomorrow when you can make the decision. But I'll think more about this. Thanks.
I'm sorry if I'm rephrasing a question that may have been asked before, but I also have a problem with your use of the concept of ability.
Okay.
So it seems to me you made a distinction between, agential and non-agential abilities, and non-agential abilities could be those that, thermostats and volcanoes have. They're just, causal efficacy or something like that.
Yeah.
And then there are agential abilities, and those are the ones that you're interested with regard to groups. And now there's an asymmetry between the ascription of agential abilities and responsibilities, duties, decisions, and so forth. And, if I got you right, the clue seems to be that there are abilities that go beyond non-agential abilities that we can ascribe to non-agential groups. Now, first somebody could say, well, why are you using ability in this sense at this point if you're not doing the same with duty and decision? You're using the term agential ability if, agents are involved in bringing about this ability. Why not, duty if duties are involved? Yeah. And you're saying you're bringing up a linguistic intuition or a theoretical intuition. So that's what we use the word ability for. We want to distinguish, or agential ability in this sense. We want to distinguish cases in which agency is involved from those in which agency isn't involved. Mm-hmm. And so somebody could say, well, no, that's exactly not the purpose of the concept of ability. Mm-hmm. What we do when ascribing abilities is exactly what we want to do when we're ascribing responsibilities. So could you say more about this intuition that seems to base your description of the concept of ability?
Great. So there are really important methodological questions here about the extent to which this is an ameliorative versus a descriptive project. So it's true. So I appeal to these linguistic intuitions. We seem to want to say these things about duets and rugby teams. And then I'm like, but we want to think about what the point of this concept should be, and so guide it by that. And I kind of want to do this reflective equilibrium between both. So I want to take the intuition seriously and take our practice and the way that we use these concepts in everyday life seriously. But I also do want to think about, well, what work can these concepts do for us? So to that extent, it is ameliorative and kind of revisionary. Why I think we should posit ability. So this is something that happens in the book. So sorry, this is kind of boring. It's something I've said before. I think that non-agentive groups' abilities are important for justifying coordination duties. So I think it's because you're a member of a group that's able to produce some outcome that you have an individual duty to act responsibly to the other members of the group with a view to producing that outcome. So that's a moral reason for taking this ameliorative or revisionary approach to the concept of ability, which you might be methodologically unhappy with. So reflective equilibrium between linguistic intuitions and amelioration of concepts and what they can do for us politically and morally. And in the case of ability, that purpose is partly justifying individuals' coordination duties.
Hi, I'm Rowan from UCL. So I was going to ask something else, but I'm going to ask about Gunnar's question. So this was about I'm able now to give the book back tomorrow, and then the suggestion that I have a duty now to give the book back tomorrow. And your response was that the duty doesn't get a hold on me until tomorrow. So that doesn't seem quite right, because so if I today have a book that I need to give back tomorrow, it seems like I'm obliged not to do things that will obliged not to do things that will prevent me from giving the book back tomorrow. So I shouldn't go on holiday.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, great.
It seems like it's the obligation to give the book back tomorrow.
That explains that. Yeah, great. So I feel like what you've just described is a different case from Gunnar's. So Gunnar's was meant to be set up such that my decisions today have absolutely no bearing on the returning of the book. And I take it if going on holiday is kind of on the deliberative table for me today, then I do have the duty today, but that's because there are decisions that I can make today that bear upon the returning of the book. So, yeah, so I think I worry that the case has now changed such that now, actually, there are decisions I can make today that bear upon this thing. Yeah. I mean, I still think Gunnar's question is a problem. So you're right to press me on it, but I think that particular example I can deal with.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so there's going to be some announcement about some practicalities concerning tonight, but if anyone who hasn't asked a question yet has a really short one, we can take that one as the last one. Well, thank you. Oh, not Arto. The fellow in the middle behind Arto.
Yeah,
we can talk later.
I was wondering, right at the start, you described Britain as a collective. Britain is a state. And it's not a collective of persons, but it's a legal structure. Does that make any difference to your argument?
Oh, good. Good. I thought you were going to press me on the difference between Britain and the UK. Yeah, good. So Britain is a state. Yes. So sorry. Yeah. Britain is a state, and therefore it's a legal structure, not a collective. Yeah. I mean, I think we can conceptualize states in different ways for different purposes. I just disagree that Britain or the UK or whatever you want to call it is just a legal structure. I think it's important that the legal structure is kind of what binds the people together. It is the decision-making procedure, right? So it's a really important story about how the thing is a collective. But if we just had a legal structure without any role bearers, right? So if the House of Commons falls away, House of Lords, everything disappears, we no longer have the UK. It's not just a legal structure. I mean, I guess in Catherine Ritchie's framework, which I like, it came up in earlier talks, people didn't, but it's an instantiated structure. So the legal structure is there, but it has these role places, and people have to occupy those roles, and those people are agents. So I disagree that it's just a structure. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for the questions and especially for the talk.
Thank you, it's really helpful.